War is renowned as the mother of invention, and this was certainly the case in the First World War. There were 420,000 Australians enlisted in the Great War, and they were widely recognised as the most inventive troops on the battlefields. These are some of the stories of the inventors in the trenches. This is a Mark IV female tank from the First World War. These were cumbersome beasts. They were almost as lethal to their own crews as they were good at killing the enemy. This part-built replica of a Mark IV gives just some impression of how impressive these beasts must have been in action. They really were game changers for the First World War, an invention born of necessity to cross no man's land and break through enemy trenches. So it comes as something of a shock to realise that an Australian had invented a superior design for a tank before the war even started, and those plans were knocked back by the British military. His name was Lancelot de Mol. Born in Adelaide in 1880, he grew up in Victoria, where he trained as an engineering draftsman. He was a mad keen inventor, and in 1911, while surveying in difficult country near Geraldton, Western Australia, he came up with the idea of a landship. De Mol built this 1/8 working scale model of his landship design, which he took to England to show to the British military. It's just the lower hull of a tank, and there is no engine. It was steered by pivoting the front sprocket drive, and individual track links could pivot on one another, allowing sideways flexibility and improved steerability for the whole tank. But as elegant as de Mol's design was, the Landships Committee, whose job it was to build the first tanks in 1915, were completely unaware of his work. After the war, a separate British Royal Commission on Awards to Inventors found that de Mol had produced a practical tank design, and it was superior to the tanks that were actually built during the war. But sadly, the Commission found he was not entitled to any award. It's got to be one of history's great what-ifs. What if the British military had paid attention to de Mol's design and they had a working tank from the beginning of the First World War? Would they have managed to avoid the stalemate of trench warfare that saw so many lives lost? We'll never know. Much of the First World War was fought from trenches like this reconstruction in Pozières, France. They offered protection from the enemy, who were dug into their own trenches, usually less than 100 metres away. Fighting from a trench meant both staying out of sight and trying to kill an enemy you couldn't see. And I think you can see the problem that you would have trying to fire a shot out of a trench like this. You stood up to take a shot, you caught one in the head yourself. And this was a particular problem for snipers, because they'd want to put 2 shots into exactly the same spot every time. And that's where this device came into play. This is the Wallabies sniping cage. It was invented and used in the trenches at Gallipoli. The idea was you'd mount your gun in this contraption and then put it up on the parapet. You could line your shot up while you're protected by the shield in front and then lock the gun in position using that wing nut. They were used mainly at night, where darkness gave an added layer of protection, but they don't seem to have caught on. This is the only one that survives, and it was found on a Turkish dump after the war. The Wallaby sniping cage was invented by Major William Thomas Charlie. That's him on the camel on the left, with some of his mates from the 6th Light Horse. He referred to his invention as the Kangaroo rifle plate. Charlie was born in Ballarat in 1868, and he signed up in 1914. He quickly rose to the rank of Major, survived the war, and became an orchardist in Leeton, New South Wales. There were a lot of inventors in the trenches. Men from a variety of backgrounds, all coming up with more effective ways to do their new jobs as soldiers on the front line. But of all the different troops available to the British High Command, it was the Australians who were the most inventive and innovative soldiers. In November 1916, the Australian Imperial Force Inventions Research Section was established near Esher in Surrey. This team quickly took to calling themselves the Brainwave Surf Club. In command of these inventive Aussies was Lieutenant William Henry Gregory Geek. Geek was a mad keen inventor born in Berkshire, England in 1880, and he migrated to Australia as a young man. He enlisted in the AIF in January 1916 and quickly rose through the ranks. While still in training, Geek helped develop the bomb-throwing device, and this was the start of his career as an inventor for the military. And this is one of Geek's contributions to the war effort, the Geek messaging rocket. The message rocket comes in two sections. The head of the rocket that contains the propellant and has a siren whistle at the tip, and the tail, which is a two-piece tube carrying a signalling flare and a receptacle for holding messages. These rockets could travel 730 metres to 2 kilometres from the front lines to the rear, and they were used for messaging through to the end of the war. Geek is also credited with inventing a floating flare shell for the Navy and a rod gun which propelled the shell from the outside of a steel rod rather than inside of a barrel. Geek went on to serve in a similar position with the RAAF in the Second World War. He died of complications following cancer surgery in March 1944. In a nondescript corner of northern France, there is a memorial to the worst day in the whole history of the Australian military. On the 19th of July 1916, 2 battalions of Australian soldiers made their way from here to where those flags are over there, where there were entrenched machine gun positions from the Germans. In less than half an hour, there were 5,533 Australian casualties. That's more than the Australian casualties for the Boer War, the Vietnam War, and the Korean War combined. Most of the casualties at Fromelles were caused by machine guns, and it would be these weapons that would create much of the slaughter of World War I. These are the 2 machine guns most commonly used by British and Australians during the Great War. This is the Lewis machine gun. It was designed in the United States in 1911 and built in great numbers in England during the First World War. It's .303 calibre, it's air-cooled, and it's capable of firing between 500 and 600 rounds per minute. And it was that rate of fire that created a new problem. This is a magazine from a Lewis gun. This one holds 47 rounds. There is a bigger version that holds 97 rounds. So at full throttle, a Lewis machine gun would empty one of these every 5 seconds. So the problem was how to reload a magazine as quickly as possible. Enter Corporal Alexander Muirhead. We don't have any pictures of him, but he's almost certainly one of these soldiers in the AIF research section. We know that he was born in Scotland in 1882 and lived in Adelaide. He enlisted in the 5th Machine Gun Battalion and may have seen service at Fromelles. Muirhead took his device for reloading the Lewis machine gun magazine to the British military, only to find that someone had beaten him to it. So he was set to work on another machine gun problem. This is the Vickers machine gun. It's .303 calibre, just like the Lewis gun, but it has a slightly lower rate of fire at around 450 to 500 rounds per minute. But it does have twice the effective range of the Lewis gun of up to 2,000 metres. Bullets are fed into the Vickers machine gun by a canvas belt. These original belts were hard wearing, so they could be reloaded and used again. But shrinkage of the canvas belts caused the guns to jam, and that was the problem set to Muirhead: design a better belt. Apparently Muirhead worked through the night, and by the next morning he'd built a new type of belt made out of a picture hook, some clothes pegs and fencing wire. With a little more time, Muirhead realised that single-use paper belts would eliminate the shrinkage and jamming problems. Sadly, while the paper design was a winner that went straight into production, no examples of Muirhead's paper machine gun belts survive today. These quiet fields in the north of France are the site of a battle widely recognised as the turning point of the whole First World War. A battle prepared and planned to the last detail that went exactly as scheduled and set the Allies on the path to victory. And it was here at Hamel that Sir John Monash made his name as the most inventive general of the whole of the First World War. Unlike other inventors in the trenches, Monash didn't actually invent any devices himself, and many of the tactics he employed had already been used elsewhere. But his meticulous attention to how to best deploy new technologies and tactics on the battlefield earned him the distinction of the most innovative and the most successful general of World War I. Monash planned every troop movement and activity in the Battle of La Hamel to a schedule lasting 90 minutes. The actual battle was over and done with in 93. Ahead of the battle, he ordered regular shelling of the enemy positions with both smoke and gas, but on the day of the attack he only ordered smoke, so the Germans were preparing for a gas attack, which greatly compromised their ability to fight. He closely coordinated the fire from artillery with the movement of the troops and tanks so that the enemy had no time to recover and defend their positions. He arranged for planes and tanks to drop ammunition to the advancing troops. This plane was shot down during the battle while delivering supplies to the front line. He also used the noise of planes to hide the noise of tanks, giving them an element of surprise. And there were lots of other innovative details Monash introduced into his battle plans that all played their part in his success. After 4 years of mass slaughter on the Western Front, largely caused by poorly thought-through battle plans, Monash's stunning success at La Hamel clearly demonstrated the need for innovation on the battlefield and the importance of careful planning. And his success at La Hamel caught the attention of all the right people. And these are some of the honours that were bestowed upon Sir John Monash, including the sword which was used by King George V to dub him Sir John Monash in the field in 1918. It was the first time in over 300 years that a general had been so honoured in the field. Some historians hail Monash as the general who won the First World War. While that claim may be a big one to back up, there can be no doubt that the innovative Monash showed the world how to effectively use all of the modern technology of warfare, and in doing so, how to win the First World War. De Mol, Charlie, Geek, Muirhead and Monash were just 5 Aussie inventors in the trenches. There were many more. Over 420,000 Australians enlisted in the First World War. More than 60,000 of them died, and around 64% were injured in the conflict. We dedicate these stories to the memories of the fallen.